Alright, so I'm going to make a tier list of where I think decks will fall in the Astral Radiance meta. I'm using Celios Network's tier list. You've probably seen his video on it. And I think it's a pretty complete tier list, so I'm going to go ahead and use it, share my thoughts. I'm going to go in reverse order since there seems to be a lot of the older decks in the back, and then get to a lot of the newer decks later. So starting off with Arceus and Dark Box, essentially. I assume that's what that means. Um, I've always wanted to coin the term Darkseus for it because, come on, dude, it flows. But I'm gonna rate this in tier 1.5. I think, spoiler, I think Mew's not gonna be as prevalent as it was or people expect. And while Moltres and Dark Patch will always add to any decks that use Dark Pokemon, I just don't think it'll have the same utility that it had before. It'll still be good. Moltres is still a late game sweeper as a one prizer, but I just don't think it'll hit the peaks where it did previously, where Mew was the dominant deck. Arceus Beedrill also 1.5, but definitely ahead of Darkseus because it can just knock out anything with a special energy. It's just a more consuming counter, more broad counter to a lot of decks. But again, I think with Temple of Sinnoh and some of the other decks only using basic energies, I don't think it'll be as great as it was. In this meta, it was a tier S for sure, but I think it'll drift down to 1.5. Suyin Lilligant, I'm going to put it in tier 2. I think it's good, just reading it, especially with Gardenias, but I think it still has to prove itself, and with its lower HP, it's not as much of a challenge or a task to take it down like it could be Arceus. But I don't think it's terrible either. Machamp, this is where the controversial opinion starts. I think it's tier 2, and I actually think it's better than Hisuian Lilligant, just because it plays like some of the other fighting decks we have in the meta, but those use special energies to get their attacks off, like Rapid Strike Urshifu. This, you can use Pickaxe and you can build it up extremely fast. It's tanky, it does really good damage. It's just a great deck in Pokemon, and it plays a lot like those other fighting decks with Rapid Strike energy, but it doesn't rely on those. It uses basic energy and can move just as fast. I think people will play it similarly, but I think it'll just grow. I think it'll grow in the meta. It has a lot of room to develop as long as people explore it. Arceus Gyarados, 1.5 as well. It's going to be sharing a weakness with Palkia, but again, the Jolteon shutting off Inteleon's abilities and Gyarados kind of controlling energy attachments, it's still going to be pretty good. Arceus, Inteleon, I assume that's what the melody means. Again, you can throw in any tech cards and tiers you need without making it its own variant, but this is just such a great deck. It's so versatile. It's just a fantastic deck. Nothing else to say. S tier easily. Blissey Miltank, our first tier 1 deck. I think people are sleeping on this. It's doing great in Japan. It top 8s like large tournaments. It's doing great on Limitless. Every tournament it's in, I always see a top 8 or a top cut anyway. It's just great. It's slept on. Zorak box, Zorak Wormadam box. I think it's top of tier 2. Yeah, for sure. I think it's an actual deck. I think it was a deck before, but with super effective glasses, it just makes it all that much more powerful. An extra Marina. Just overall, I think it's more solid. Phantom Transformation Zorak will eventually be like a $10 holo card. Like, if it doesn't, then single prizes were just completely dead. Like, there's no way that card doesn't blow up in the future. There's just too much potential. Rapid Strike Urshifu and Galarian Moltres, Baby Moltres. Yeah, still tier 1. It takes a really skillful player to play. It's easy to get lost in the deck because of how many one-ofs, but it has great coverage of different decks, lots of potential. I would have placed it S tier prior to Astral Radiance release, but I think it's just tier 1 now because it just doesn't have the same Mew countering capabilities, and It's still a great deck though. Arceus Bibarel, controversial opinion again. I think it's S tier along with Arceus and Inteleon. And I think when the Inteleon engine rotates, this will be the new Mew Genesect. It can move fast. It has great draw. Like it, and Bibarel can share as a typing with Arceus. So Dunsparce will have a little bit more value. And even now, I think it's S tier because while Inteleon can have a higher cap for good players, it can also be a distraction or a bait to always use the Inteleon engine, whereas Bibarel you just draw and you can play from what you draw. It allows you to focus on other parts of your gameplay. But again, I feel like both decks are just highly versatile. You can put in some text. They're really consistent. They're just great. Gengar is tier 3. I think it's not tier 3, tier 2, excuse me. I think it's still a really great deck. I don't think it got actually that much weaker. I just think there's better decks to play in. I think people have picked up on that. Mew is probably the top of tier 1. There's Mightyena now. There's Temple of Sinnoh. People are still going to be gunning for it, but I think it's still tier 1. It's a 3-prizer, which also hurts compared to Arceus or even a Blissey deck, but its strength is its speed. It can donk you turn 2. I don't know any other deck that can really do that, so its speed is its strength. It's basically the ADP of this format, but I just don't think it is the best anymore. I love this deck so much, but if I'm being honest, it's also probably a tier 2. It's tanky, but it's just that it needs a 2-shot, and I still don't think this is the meta for that. The Cheryl loop and the energy loop is really cool mechanic with its ability, but I just don't see it being higher than tier 2. It's still a 3-prizer that can get 1 shot if Mew pops off with power tablets. It's not as consistent as an Arceus deck. I don't know. I want it to be, my heart really wants it to be the top of S tier because this deck is just so much fun, but it's probably bottom of tier 2. Moving on to Duraludon Arceus, I think it's a 1.5. When no one's really prepared for it, it can pop off because it's just an unstoppable wall, but I just don't think it's as good as it once was, and people are really expecting it. Especially now, I think people are realizing, hey, people are going to start playing this again. Sylveon Box, also 1.5. Honestly, in my opinion, better than Duraludon and better than Darkseus. I think it's a really versatile deck. It has lots of typings, lots of counters you can play to counter other decks. Pretty good. It's still an Arceus variant. There's no Arceus attached, but I wouldn't play this without Arceus. The Rapid Strike Box is an option, but I just don't think it's as good. Dark Box, definitely tier 3. It's just it was made as a Mew counter, and I just don't think Mew is going to be as prevalent as I've said, so it kind of loses its reason for being in the meta. It still has its own legs to stand on, but it's not as good as it once was at all, and I don't think that's controversial to say. Arceus Malamar, probably tier 2. Again, it was mostly a Mew counter with some control aspects, but I think Gyarados does that better. Even with Gyarados' weakness to lightning types, I just don't think it's worse than the Malamar version, because they kind of aim to do the same thing, slow down the opponent and counter some decks. I just think the Gyarados is overall more consistent with Arceus. Samurott, tier 1. People haven't figured it out yet, but it's tier 1. It's just that simple. It's basically a better Jolteon, like, for sure. It's a 2-prizer, has a good amount of HP, it can set up for itself. You have Dark Patch you can turn to attach. It's just a really great card. I'm surprised it's not being played more. Palkia, S tier for sure. Probably in between the two Arceus variants here, because it's a better Suicune. It has more HP, harder to knock out. It's just as fast, because to get that second attach, if you don't have to Melanion, you can use the V-Star ability to, set up more Palkias or Inteleons. You can even attack with Inteleon in this deck. It's overall a fantastic card, very strong. We've seen it pop off in Japan, probably be the best deck in format in Japan. Well, it is the best deck in format in Japan, so it'll probably be an S tier over here. Single Strike Malamar, probably somewhere up here. In tier 2, it's great, it can pop off. I'm not surprised when it top cuts a tournament or a regionals, but I just don't think it has the same power as a lot of these other decks. It's just held back, it's a single prizer. Still good though. This would either be bottom of tier 1 or closer to the top of tier 1.5. It's the Ice Rider. It can hit 280, which is becoming more and more of a relevant number very easily. Very consistent. You obviously play it with Inteleon. Just overall a good deck. Very consistent. Whimsicott, gonna put it at tier 2. Somewhere around here. It's pretty good, but I think with Temple of Sinnoh and other counters, special energy, how it walls attaching special energy from hand will be less relevant. I think less people will be playing the stadium game. So still good, but just tier 2. I'm going to take Hisuian Decidueye now, because this is a controversial opinion, but I think it's bottom tier 1 or close to the top of tier 1.5, probably tier 1.5. It's doing well in a lot of limitless tournaments, and the V-Star build actually adds a lot of consistency to the deck, and it can one-shot pretty much all V-Stars very easily. It's, in my opinion, very underrated. It's doing great in limitless tournaments, and I'll expect it to do great in real-life tournaments as well. Dialga has lots of potential, but it's tier 2 for sure. It's just not as consistent or as fast. The extra turn's really cool, but it's just not there yet, you know? Metal Saucer's rotating soon, so I don't know if this deck will get any better, but this is a deck that I'll keep an eye on, because as new cards come out, this definitely has a lot of potential. Then finally, Darkrai. I'm actually going to put it as the second best deck in tier 1.5, just for the simple fact that I think it's already a great deck. People are saying that we need to wait for different cards or more cards to come out, but I feel like with Dark Patch, the Glaring Wheezing that counts 2 energy for everyone attached, EXP shares, Radiant Greninja, or Radiant Hawlucha to hit numbers easier. I think it's just a vastly underrated deck, and it can already hit the numbers it needs to. It can already move fast, and it will only get better, I think. As more cards come out, there will be different ways to play it. It just hasn't been figured out as of now, and it will need to be figured out as new sets arrive. I think it's underrated. Simple. One deck that I wish was on here, but I don't think anybody saw coming, was the Regigigas Exodia deck, where you have to put down all the Regis and pop off. I've seen it top 8 a lot of the tournaments it's played in on Limitless. It actually seems to be an actual deck. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's this Regigigas right here. You build a deck around it. And it seems really solid, actually, from what I've seen. I might be hyping it up a bit too much, but I would probably place it around here in 1.5, either better than Hisuian Decidueye, or even better than Darkrai V-Star. Very controversial opinion, but it's just a strong deck from what I've seen. It's really started to prove itself. It's definitely better than the, Inteleon Dark Toolbox. So, at worst, it's somewhere in tier 2. And I think that's really it. I think they're mostly in order. I think this is probably below Sylveon, maybe even below ADP because of the lightning type weakness. Electric Pokemon will smash it because they're going to be naturally countering it because they're hunting for that Palkia matchup. I think Blissey Miltank is better than Urshifu, to be honest. I think it's vastly underrated. But I think that's the tier list. I think this is a good tier list. So let me know what y'all think, what I got wrong, what you think is different, and yeah, just let me know.